Joshua L. Harris, welcome back.
Hello there. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, the second time I think is always easier because it's way more kind of kicked back and a little more informal, I feel. So welcome back. Nice to have you.
Yep, it's great to be here. We had a wonderful time the first time that we were together anyway, so that's good.
So what are we, 2 days away from an earnings call with Disney? I thought this is the perfect time to jump into this.
Yeah, it's there are always propaganda ploys with that one, so I rarely pay attention to those nowadays. But it's still, I'm more interested in what the back chatter is, like what the pundits and what everyone else is saying about it, because I think that their feel for it really gives you a sense of where the marketplace is. In regards to the company, not the things that they tell you online, but the things that people are inferring by them. So I paid more attention to the commentary of that. Same thing with like movies as well. It's just like I rarely watch any movies lately or anything new that comes out, but I'm very interested in how the audience reception is and everything to it. So it's a kind of a similar situation with them.
And to that point, I'm merely interested in what the stock does. And at this moment, it's ticking up. And if it trends that way, okay, fine, that's fantastic for anybody that's a shareholder. And it looks like it could and it should. My question for you is, if the stock continues to tick upwards, then how do you reconcile that with all of the perceived bad decision making?
Well, when anybody talks to me about stock or any of the financials of any company, I always revert back to the teachings of Simon Sinek, which is a leadership visionary. And really, when you're dealing with stockholders, you're not really dealing with, like there's this whole entire other structure to it, which people talk to as stakeholder capitalism. That's a complete false assumption. But even stockholder supremacy is a myth. So they don't have much weight over the longevity of an actual company. I mean, they will be more than happy to gamble their funds on any particular stock or on any particular company, just as long as it makes money at that second. However, if the quality of the product and everything else starts to dwindle down, that's when you're going to actually incur actual problems. I mean, like the stock for Disney could soar like dramatically. It could be like over $500 per share, and it'd be the worst quality product that they're producing at the same time. That has little consequence to me, as it shouldn't for anybody else, because when you're dealing with stockholders, they're not stockholders, they're gamblers, and they're just gambling on your name. And if you're talking about the stock increasing, well, I think that has largely to do with the present shift in the economy than anything else. I don't think that it's actually a Disney generated thing, or that anyone else is taking tremendous interest in that. Now, if they're going to start announcing like major leadership changes, that might have some bearing on it. But that's long away from now, so that has no relevance at this particular point.
But just to use your choice of words there, propaganda. Obviously, Iger will state that because the stock is up, his decisions are justifiable, or he'll use the stock to justify his decision making. So, I look at the whole of it, and I say, while it's fantastic that the stock is up, it is sort of a short-term proposition. And at a certain point, kind of, you talked about, if it hit $500, how cheap would the brand be? But there's already signs of that, and you'll find it on Twitter, but you're never going to hear about it in any real consequential way. So I saw a clip before we started talking today for the new Captain America movie. And somebody tweeted out, listen closely, it's the same sound effect 3 times in a row that Disney's using in this, or it's the use of AI for decorations in a gift shop. So I feel like Disney is in the pursuit of the fast buck and everything that Iger has gone after. They've completely tossed quality out. So I agree with you that the stock isn't a fair measure, but he will use it as justification. And he will continue to say that, hey, listen, what I've done makes sense for the future of the company. So with all that going on, and you look at all that, and you go, all right, great. You made Mufasa maybe out of the gate. It didn't really work. People didn't respond to it, but in the long term, it's a win, and you're going to take that win. So that's going to give you the direction to continue making more of that dreck. All right, which is Yiddish for crap. And you just got to ask yourself, what happens when the rubber meets the road? Like the stock goes up, the quality goes down. What happens? Does the company just hack itself up and accept that notion? Or does somebody come in? Is there another hostile takeover?
Well, God, I hope that there's another hostile takeover. I mean, I said for a couple well, at least a decade now, that what didn't happen in 1980, and what didn't happen in 1984 with the company needs to happen now. This company needs to be bought, split up into as many pieces as you could possibly make it, so that the business units that are actually thriving can continue to thrive and not be brought down by the ones that are not. There's enormous amounts of accounting missteps, shady things that are going on with the company financially, and they've been going on for decades, and it's an open secret. I mean, it's just like Walt Disney World funds the horrible movies that no one wants to see. They fund things that happen with the CCP. Every single business unit that is actually doing something right is being cut off at the knees because of the skewed priorities that Iger has. And yeah, to speak to your point about it, whenever the stock goes up now, I'm actually more nervous than if it was to go down, because if it was to go down and the quality go down, then fine, okay, that's homeostasis. That's the way that the universe is actually supposed to work. But he will use any sort of uptick inside of the stock prices to validate his own decision making, which has been abhorrent for his entire time that he's been here. It's just that now people are finally catching up to exactly what his policies and business philosophies and practices have been doing all this time, because you can ride this wave very, very for a long time. I mean, the company has been existing largely on the fumes of Eisner of the Eisner era for a long while. I mean, you can definitely bring Walt Disney and all the way back into it, but definitely the Eisner period with the Disney decade and all the enormous growth and the animation renaissance and everything. Those are things that are top of mind for most other people. I like to encompass the entire 101-year history of the company myself, and I know I'm in the severe minority on that, but that's what I do with this. But most of the time people are just linking about the last 25 to 30 years, which is mostly an Eisner thing. So I get very worried whenever they say, oh yeah, the Disney stock is doing good. I'm just like, okay, great, so you're rewarding bad behavior and bad product.
But you made a comment about the market being up at this particular moment. Things are down, and the only reason Disney is up is because of this earnings call. So I guess the question becomes is, if in the immediate, let's accept the premise that in the immediate, the uptick, let's just say that the internal logic works in the moment. In other words, Iger's decision making, the stock is up, his decisions are good, he's announcing new projects. I mean, they've got panic construction going on all over Disney World. But let's just accept the premise for a moment that the stock being up is good for his agenda, for proof that his agenda is valid. Okay, but to your point, it further cheapens the brand as a whole. So that inevitably, if you accept that logic, there is an intersection. And that's where that ceiling occurs. So when does that happen? And what does it look like? Because based off of that logic, it is going to happen.
So I'm a little confused about the question there. So you're asking like where's the actual intersection between the way in which the stock price is performing versus what the actual quality of the product being produced is?
Well, I think it's the overall ceiling, right? We talk about the fact that this sort of cheapification of things, which is counterintuitive to Walt Disney's principles, is going to hit a ceiling. So whether we're talking about the prices going up, whichever metric you want to use, the stock is just a metric, like you said. But where does the ceiling occur where this cash grab, this quick buck, this lack of creativity, this Iger agenda, as you like to call it, where does that ceiling occur and what does it look like?
Well, I've been thinking about that ever since like 2005. And I've been beating that drum since that time. It's just like, okay, eventually the public is going to get wise to the things that are actually going on, that are to their detriment. But it just never has seemed to happen until very recently. And I do think that we are reaching a tipping point with that. I mean, you can look at, you brought up the fact that at this moment, and I'm not looking at the data right now, but the rest of the stock you said is basically down, and Disney is slightly up. Is that what you said?
In the moment, yeah. I mean, all the AI stocks tanked. We had all that with the DeepSeek announcement. So for all intent and purpose, the market's down, and Disney has an uptick, marginal uptick.
Well, yeah, and the reason why that is just because that there is a earnings call happening. Right. If you whisper Disney in the woods, the stockholders are going to hear that, and you're going to get an uptick. It's just because the word is is top of mind in the lexicon.
But that echo chamber. But that echo. I don't mean to cut you off, but that echo chamber is Bob Iger's validation.
Yes. Yeah, and he does so at like most people, will tend to say, especially the rage tubers and everything, that they will say that just like he does this at his own peril. This will affect him if negatively, it affects us. It affects the consumer. It affects the employees of the Disney organization and every single one of their child companies. That it really affects us. This is not a revenge type of a scenario that is just like, okay, yeah, sure, we'll show them. And it's just like, no, okay, this hurts everyone else, and that becomes extraordinarily complicated. And a lot of people can't deal with the extreme complexity of this situation, because you essentially have not most, but definitely I'd say around like 40+% of our cultural heritage in the last 100+ years that is being held hostage by the people that are currently in positions of power at Burbank. And that's a really complicated situation for anybody to actually understand. So when you were talking about like when they were having the uptick there, it's just like, or when the intersection was going to be occurring. I think that that's going to happen this year. I think that there's actually going to be somewhat of a reckoning with the company. I mean, as long as they continue to go down their path, if they decide to cancel certain projects, if they decide to go in a different direction on things, then yeah, you're going to experience some correction and realignment of perhaps the market value of the stock versus the actual value of the company. But they seem to know exactly where the line is, and they're willing to, and they know how to get just on the right side of that line, which is very frustrating, because then you have all of these mountains of other problems that are associated with the company that continue to fester, that aren't being taken care of. And then of course you have Bob Iger's whole succession plan. Which is, James Gorman has taken it over from him, from what I understand. He's not going to, Iger has been dragging his feet on that, just like he dragged his feet the last 8 times that he renewed his contract with a board members that are selected by him, which I think that there's some enormous ethical violations that are occurring with that. But yeah, so he's not taking it seriously. So James Gorman has stepped in, and he says basically that he'll take over the succession plan. But still, it's just like, okay, everything hinges on that one part of his exit contract where he is allowed to basically maintain oversight and control of the company for the first 5 years of a new CEO's tenure. So anyone that is worthy and intelligent enough and capable enough of actually managing this company, and there's a very small list of those people, they're not going to agree to those terms because everything that needs to, because there are significant. I mean, if you can be on either side of any particular thing, you could say that Disney is doing fine, or you could say that they're doing horribly, but on any of those, you do know that you do have to recognize that there are some massive structural changes that need to occur with this organization. And if you have somebody who is coming in, they're coming in to change things from the Bob Iger regime. Well, you can't do that while Bob is still there for 5 years, which means that he will do the same thing that he did with Chapek, and they will continue. He will continuously undermine the person who's going to be put into that position the entire way through. And he doesn't do it out of any sort of like loyalty or I've built this thing up and I know that it's the right thing. It's just like he does it because he's bored. That's the reason why he came. One of the reasons why he decided to formally come back to the company is because he was bored at home and he was annoying Willow Bay. I mean, so he's doing this as a plaything. I'm just like, but this is not a plaything. You're dealing with a massive cultural institution here that people have invested their livelihoods and their passions inside of, and you're treating it like it's some sort of plaything.
And to that speaks to the disorganization, because if you really look at everything that and the last few years, the last 2 years, everything post Chapek has gone the opposite direction that anyone expected. And it shows you that they have no plan. And they're just shoving decisions in anywhere in any place that they can. Right? They're shoving in a decision. They're going, oh, you know what? We got to do a thing. Put it over there. And obviously we're talking about the parks to a certain extent, but the company as a whole has just been reduced to a series of widgets. And they like to do this thing where they like to trot things out to pretend to be a tech company to appease the market, but then they don't deliver any of that to the guest experience. Like, at least during Eisner's era, there was something, that could have been said for consideration towards the guest experience. But what you just said about another 5 years of Iger, that says to me that if that ceiling doesn't occur this year, and I'm not so sure that it will, then it's not going to happen during the next CEO's tenure. And that could be a very short-lived tenure, because honestly, if it's not for another hostile acquisition, or if it's not for like an Eisner type person to come in and completely upend everything, 5 more years of Bob Iger is going to be the death of the Walt Disney Company.
Correct. Yeah, and that's the major concern of it, because as the status quo is now, this is not going to look good. And you can say, because I've said for years, of course, that it should be split up, and it would be wonderful if you would have some sort of like Walt legacy company that would be there to actually take care of it. But my biggest concern at this point is they are really poisoning the well of goodwill for the legacy brands, much less anything else. I mean, you cannot deny. I mean, sure, you can. Most of the time, I think that people don't compartmentalize. I can compartmentalize about these things, and I'm not trying to separate myself out from the public, because I really don't think that there's too much of a difference there. But like it becomes harder to watch things like like I love Beauty and the Beast. I think that Beauty and the Beast is one of the greatest artistic achievements ever put on film. It's the only film in history. It's the only animated film in history that ever was nominated for Best Picture, and will always be that way for the rest of time if the Academy has anything to say about it. But still, you watch it today, and I'm thinking about that horrible live action version with the Emma Watson one, and I have to remove that from my brain whenever I do that, and I shouldn't have to turn off a segment of my brain in order to enjoy something which was naturally good to begin with. And you go down the line with that. You can think about every single one of their quote unquote live action remakes that they're doing, or the things that they've done to Star Wars, or the things that they're doing with Marvel, or any of the other brands that you could list that goes on and on and on. My big concern with it is just like, okay, so this will become a really dead property, because I don't think that Disney is dead, and I don't because first of all, it's a semantical thing. It's just like it's an organization. Now it's not no longer a man; it's an organization, which means that it can be it could be revived. It could go into a comatose state, which it basically is right now. But still, you do get to a point where it's just like, okay, if you poison this so much that people aren't going to consider you even when you're actually making a positive change, that's something that is an enormous cultural loss for our entire civilization. And that might sound hyperbolic, but it really isn't. I mean, if you really stop and think about everything that Disney and Lucasfilm and Marvel and all of these other properties that Iger gobbled up in rapid succession, it's a massive piece of American culture, and by extension, world culture. So it's just like, I think it's very important that we really, first of all, we do need to separate that out. I think that we do need to compartmentalize that as a society. I don't hold out much faith that people will actually do that, but it still would be something that I think is important for us to at least attempt to do. So, it's just like one example of that is, it's just like, I think that no one will deny the inherent beauty of something like the Sistine Chapel or the Notre Dame Cathedral, and like when the Notre Dame Cathedral was burning, and basically like most of it, and not most of it, but definitely a vast majority of it was destroyed. I mean, like everyone felt the cultural loss of that, and you didn't need to be a Christian or a Catholic to appreciate that. You didn't need to be a Parisian who actually steps in there every single day to feel that loss. I think that the whole world felt that. I mean, it's a UNESCO site. So, and I think that, in many ways, a lot of the accomplishments of the Walt Disney Company under Eisner all the way back to Walt is very much, in alignment with that. And I do think that, that is something that we should be fighting for at this point. And now, how does that look with it? I think that, like we do need to have some sort of hostile takeover. We definitely need to have somebody who is going to be able to come in and start selling. I'm in conversation all the time with a couple people, one of which used to be an executive with the company, and it's just like, and he rattles on about this all the time, and I completely agree with him. I nod knowingly because he's talking about ESPN, because I'm not a sports person, but I can definitely see it's just like, yeah, he says just like, you definitely need to split off ESPN. That's the first thing that needs to go, and then a lot of other things need to go off. And it's not just the fact that like they're either performing or they're underperforming. It's that if you have something that if for example, if Marvel does well, how does that really positively affect the image of the Walt Disney Company or the brand of the Walt Disney Company? And the answer to that is that it doesn't. It only goes to the glory of the Marvel brand, but it really doesn't do anything to Disney. So why in the heck are they even involved with each other in the first place? I mean, the reason why you do mergers and acquisitions is to cut out your competition, and also to make things stronger for your end. Well, that's the exact opposite that's happened underneath Iger. So, I mean, it's just like, what are we doing? What are we doing here with this? Like we shouldn't be associated with this or that. And, now I hear, rumors of possible meet and greets of the Simpsons inside of the Disney parks. I mean, the Simpsons are to use a buzzword now, although I was using it long before people were using it. It's the antithesis of the Disney ethos. I mean, like you can love The Simpsons. That's fine. You can love it. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't exist in this universe. Absolutely not. But you cannot deny that they're completely opposed to the ethics and values of the Walt Disney Company.
Unequivocally, we were talking about this a couple weeks ago, and not only do I agree with you, the only place that they would work is Hollywood Studios, and they don't work there. Or throw them in Springs at a meet and greet. Like it is not like mall characters. Like it doesn't. The ethos is the perfect term, but it doesn't mesh. And Ice Age doesn't mesh. Okay, and I can make a better case for incorporating Ice Age into Animal Kingdom than I could for Simpsons anywhere in Disney World. But what concerns me about the whole idea of Bob Iger still having his hands in the pot is that it becomes too late. And, the Walt Disney Company as it stands today, with all I think of them as tiles, like what you talk about Marvel and Star Wars, they're tiles on Disney Plus.
Yes.
But from a business perspective, they're competition with each other. Because if you're actually trying to put a movie out, now, let's say we have this weekend, well, who gets it? Frozen 3? Lion King 5? Toy Story 8? The new Star Wars movie. So now you get to the point where you've got your hands in too many things. And now you're almost creating conflict internally in terms of how you market and distribute because you're doing too much.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely what's been happening. And that's one of the reasons why, when people tout the box office numbers of this or that film, like example of this is the 2019 live action or photorealistic version of The Lion King, people say, oh, yeah, it made so much money. I'm just like, well, you do realize that every other motion picture studio in Hollywood cleared the runway for that one movie. They didn't have anything coming out 3 weeks before it, and they didn't have anything coming out 3 weeks after it. So when you look at that box office total, that's the box office total for basically all motion pictures, period, which actually makes it extraordinarily pathetic. I mean, if you were going by any other metric, if you were going by any other time, the Lion King, they should have made $3 billion off of that film, not the 1.2 that they did at the time. So if you look at it in the entirety of the GDP of Hollywood, that's a very pathetic number to make $1.2 billion. And that's, not even incorporating all the losses and everything that they do with how expensive these films are to create at the same exact time. So yeah, that's definitely happened. And that's also one of the major problems with it, because there is no competition in Hollywood anymore. And yes, I know that there are certain people that are cinephiles, especially people that are well in the know, that we all watch their shows on YouTube, and they say it's just like, oh yeah, but there are independent films being made, and there are
there's not.
This or that thing, and I'm just like, yeah, they're being made, but they're not being marketed, which means that they might as well not exist in the beginning.
That's exactly. They're not being made look. The thing with independent cinema is we haven't had independent cinema for most of my lifetime. Okay. The notion of Sundance is just a marketplace. It's not where independent cinema goes to thrive. It's independent bankrolled movie making, but they're pre-selling. I mean, most people will never understand the intricacies of that business. And that business, by the way, is dead. So when you're Disney and you're making 4-quadrant motion pictures, the reason you're not going to drop Star Wars and Marvel on the same weekend is because it's like the head eating the tail. So now what you do is you go, no, Marvel, get out of the way. But what you're going to do is create internal conflict within the company, and now that spend is going to go to one movie, not the other. The other movie is not going to open up next month because it's too soon. So now that movie opens up a year later. And now you've just throttled the entire operation, as opposed to being like, hey, we produced this movie for another distributor, let them put it out, and we'll make our money that way. But
Yeah,
it's a lot of
of
inside
that.
baseball.
Yeah, but also you just on a practical concern with that, and it's like you're using. I mean, like the examples that you're using are valid, but in reality, what is actually happened? Yes, of course, there are now like Marvel films that are in conflict with Star Wars films, and that's one angle. But one of the things that they did to completely remove the competition is they got rid of Disney almost entirely. There is no Walt Disney Studios at this moment that doesn't have anything to do with remakes and sequels of previous efforts.
Right. Yeah.
There is nothing
which
left
kills
on
the
there.
brand identity.
Yeah, because that's the most important brand. I see a lot of the time when people are talking about these things, like especially in the YouTube space, they always focus on the children. They never focus on the parent. And like there's been millions of hours of content that is online right now raging against Disney Star Wars, which should be Iger Star Wars or Kennedy or whatever, but I'm not going to get into the blame game right now. So you have all of these content on there. I'm just like, wait, no, the first person that they took out was Walt. It's just like, here you are, you're talking about these things. I'm like, I get the fact that, Star Wars is important to you, but we're talking about a 6-film series here instead of a major motion picture studio that produced until the time of the Lucasfilm acquisition. You're talking about orders of magnitude like 100 to 500 plus films, 500 plus IPs you could look at it, and you're grimacing over that one IP. And here's the important part about that. Again, you can love Marvel, you can love Pixar, you can love Lucasfilm. However, it was the Walt Disney Company's bankroll was the one that could actually afford to purchase them. And the reason why that they were able to purchase it is because the Disney brand is stronger than all of them literally combined. That's a mathematical problem. That is not an opinion. That is not a subjective thing. That is an objective fact, because if it wasn't true, then the reverse would have happened and Star Wars would have bought Disney. However, what actually happened in real life, what happened in practice is that Bob made the Walt Disney Company subservient to his acquisitions.
Well, he turned into a giant licensing company.
Yes, yeah. And it's that's not really and that's the problem that you're getting with that, is that you're not getting that. And really, like we're seeing right now, I think that we're seeing the effects of what it means. Like for a little while, people would be having these musings in the early 2000s. Especially when I was working for the company, there would be an occasional a question that would come up, a little ponderance. It's just like, is there life after Disney? And I'm like, I don't really think so. And now that we're looking at the examples of that, because we're talking about brands, we're talking about the financial viability of them and everything. But really, if you want to get down to the actual seriousness of it, there is a massive amount of the human experience which is not being explored at this time because you don't have Disney anymore. Because as my mentor, Tom K. Morris, said, and I've committed this to memory, is that, like everyone wonders what Disney actually is. And like Disney is entertainment which reaffirms the best qualities of life and the human condition.
And storytelling.
Yeah, and it's also it's that life affirming thing. It's just like, it's a lens with which to view the world, and it's a wonderful lens with which to view it. It's not rose colored, but it is definitely presenting the world in a more aspirational way than we actually see it today. And there's things like, like there's no such thing as romantic comedies anymore, and people wonder why there's an epidemic of loneliness in our society. I'm like, well, maybe that's because we've stopped telling stories about people, how people interact relate with each other. There's no actual human dramas anymore. There's only these superficial superhero films which deal with godlike beings which we can't really identify with to begin with, and that we only think now that the only way that we're ever going to solve any of our world's massive problems is if we have these fictitious characters that are going to be able to save it, rather than producing stories that focus on the human element and the people that have made actual accomplishments, and that, like that we can aspire to being them. And I'm not talking about just biopics or anything, but I'm just talking about just in general, stories about like normal people that go through normal situations that have extraordinary consequences associated with them. And we don't tell those stories anymore.
Well,
and that's really the true loss of our culture right now, and the reason why that there's so many people that are so powerless in societies, because there's no models anymore. There's no role model in a meta narrative sense that we can aspire to.
So you talk about Walt Disney, and when you look at the company and how they've completely distanced themselves from him, okay, then you can't expect much more when it comes to a Stan Lee, a Jim Henson, or anybody else. So, look, to your point about stories and individuals and all of this, I love characters. Okay, I'm looking at the shelf above me. You would think that I was an animator because I got everything from Ninja Turtles to Star Wars to Mega Man. I love characters. But characters are nothing without story. And the story behind the stories are what inspire the next generation of storytellers. And when we've lost sight of the legacy of Jim Henson, of the legacy of Walt Disney, the legacy of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, now just as a holding company for IP, the Walt Disney Company has no connection to these men. And I would suggest that disconnect right there is a huge part of the problem. Because Spider-Man is super cool, but you want to know what's way cooler than Spider-Man? The story of Jack Kirby.
Yes. Yeah.
And
absolutely.
The Walt Disney Company's not going to teach that story.
And also, like if you want to extrapolate upon that, it's just like, okay, so you're talking about the characters, you're talking about the story and everything. It's just like, well, the primary reason for Walt's initial success had largely to do with the fact that Mickey Mouse was the very first actual character that had a personality. Now, what that means is that there are things that, because before Mickey, there was animated characters, but they would do whatever they want to. It's just like there was no moral compass. There was no center of, okay, this character will do this or will not do that. There was no sort of parameters on that, which makes it kind of irrelevant, because if you're going to have a character that's just going to hop around the screen and do whatever their emotions are driven to them, even if they considered that, you just think it's profoundly superficial. Well, with Mickey, they actually set down Mickey, Walt, and Iwerks, and they were just like, okay, Mickey will do this and he will not do that. And as a result of that, you get the parameters for it, and it makes it extraordinarily believable, because, just like real human beings, there are things that I will do, but I will definitely not do. I won't do everything. You won't do everything. Like we have certain things, and the restrictions on our behavior is actually what determines our personality and what makes it a more interesting and believable experience. Well, if you're talking about like something like a Marvel character, there are certain things that Peter Parker could do, should do, and there are things that he won't do.
Right.
And if you look at it, and if you look at the products that they're producing right now, not just about Spider-Man, but if you extrapolate it out to everybody else, is that it's just like, okay, well, you're just going everywhere with these characters. You're just going everywhere with these properties. You're not really considering any of the reasons why it was successful beforehand.
But that's thematic integrity, and the
Yes.
Walt Disney Company has lost sight of that across the board.
Yeah, exactly. And when you stand for it, because the problem with it is that they're also, if you want to look at it just from a mechanical way of looking at it, that they're trying to appease everyone. And then when you try to appease everyone, you're appeasing no one. And that's one of the reasons why these blockbusters I find profoundly distasteful now, is because they've watered them down to a point where it's just like, okay, you're trying to please everybody, but you're not really speaking to any particular segment of the audience, and you're not really you're not finding a hook inside of the stories. You're not really finding anything that people can actually latch on to. An example of this would be like the latest Marvel movies that are all somewhat of a joke. They're a joke in and of themselves. I'm just like, you look at something like, like I look at things like, the Thor Ragnarok thing, which everyone hated. And you have that whole entire scene where they're in Mount Olympus, and they strip her naked, and then all the girls swoon and everything. And I'm looking at it because I personally don't care about the Marvel property, and I'm thinking it's hysterical. And the fact that I think it's hysterical, that's actually a problem because I don't care about the brand. Can you imagine what happens if people do care about the brand, and the characters that everyone cherishes are being treated in such a way? And you could extrapolate that out to almost every single thing that they have their hands in at this point.
Well, the live action remakes, like to go back to The Lion King, because I was so excited for that, because I thought, oh wow, you'll visually elevate the source material, but you'll honor the source material. And no, these live action remakes are like the cinematic equivalent of tofu. It's just all base, no flavor. The only good thing to come out of The Lion King is The Mandalorian. I don't know if you know the relation there, but the technology from Jungle Book to Lion King is what got the volume in The Mandalorian.
Oh, okay, yeah.
All right. So I'm all for swinging at I'm all for taking your shot. I'm not going to say don't go for it, right? Because there is opportunity to be had. But if that's all you're doing, are these emotionless remakes, you're not elevating anything.
Well, also, like it's not just the contamination of the story. I mean, it's like, the serious question is, why are you doing this? Is there a need to be doing this? It's just like one of my fictional heroes is Ian Malcolm. It's just like, you didn't stop to think about whether or not you could. You just whether or not you should in these situations. And just like, yeah, sure, you can make a photorealistic version of the Lion King. Why? Why would you want to do that? Especially since, if you know anything about the animated medium, then you would realize that the reason why this works in animation is the exact reason why it could never work in a quote-unquote live-action setting.
And I can't stand that term. Oh, yeah. I can't stand that term.
Yeah. So it's really, you would know about these things. You would know, it's just like, okay, look, these things are going to be more expressive there. And it's also something that could be taken, you look at it as kind of like a fairy tale. Even though the Lion King is, it's Jesus and Hamlet in Africa, which is how they pitch the movie, by the way. So you can't really accept that if it's actual animals, because that actual animals don't do that. But if they're in the animated art form of 2D, you realize that it's a metaphor, it's an allegory. They're not real animals that are doing these things. And most of the time, it's just like that one's a weird one, because it's actually it straddles the line. Most Disney films, in fact, almost all of them, they're either anthropomorphized or they're straight up animals. So something like Bambi, it's just like, Bambi is a deer, Thumper is a rabbit, that sort of thing. But not necessarily with Lion King, because Lion King is just like, they're definitely lions, but they're also, you're dealing with a royal family at the same time. You're dealing with royal family squabbles, and you're dealing with the politics of bringing the hyenas into the Pride Lands and all these other things that have nothing to do with the animal kingdom. And on the opposite side of that, you have the ones that are actually completely anthropomorphized. It's a weird discussion to have, but just like, Mickey is not a mouse and Donald is not a duck.
Yeah, but you don't even really you don't even stop to think about digesting that in animated form. It's
Correct.
only when they take it out of the animated form and apply photorealism to it that it becomes so jarring that you start to pick it apart at that level. And that goes back to what you said. If they actually knew what they were doing, they would have never embarked upon it because there's just no upside.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the films that they keep on threatening to do is a live action version of Hunchback, and I profoundly love that movie. I profoundly love Disney's version of Hunchback. I know that there are some people that are literature purists that have a problem with it, and really, I think that it would be a 10 times more wonderful movie if you just skip the "A Guy Like You" segment. Everything else is wonderful for that, and you can do that with our digital technology. I always just skip that song, and then we're right back where we need to be with it. But they keep on threatening to do that show. I'm like, no. I mean, this only exists. Disney's version of this story only is appropriate in animation. I mean, could you imagine a real life photorealistic, grotesque, truly grotesque Quasimodo?
No, because look what they dropped the ball with Snow White.
Yeah, and that one's just a purely propaganda a piece for a political and social movement which no longer exists.
But I'm not even going to take debate on that.
Yeah, I know.
I want to.
I was just going to say that.
I want to take debate on that,
Yeah.
but I feel like that's a different episode.
Correct. Yeah.
And I would love to do that episode with you, but
I don't want to get into it right now either. I'm just saying.
No, I know.
That is. Yeah.
Also, since you've now just derailed everything, I'm going to further derail this. Because we were both cast members.
Yes.
You used to carry an umbrella around even when it wasn't raining.
How did you know that?
I know things.
Really?
I know lots of things.
This is like that whole entire thing in on Inside the Actor Studio when it's just like, let me see your blue cards right now.
Right. Like, so now, is that just like, was that a phase? Do you still do it?
Well, no, because I don't work with the company anymore.
No, but I mean, the umbrella's got nothing to do with Disney.
Well, actually, it did. So when I was working at the Hollywood Tower Hotel, thematically, I would bring an umbrella. First of all, you need to be prepared for any situation. Secondly, I would use it because I knew because it was actually for show. It had a dual purpose. So it was actually I would walk into work because when you're working at the studio, there is no utilidor or anything. So you're traversing the park, which is fine because you're all in the same time period, in the same setting, basically everywhere. So I would walk into work and it's just like you would have the umbrella because you never know, especially in Florida and in our weather. But also, it kind of had a stand-in as a cane, and I had people. It's just like I would wear my trench coat over my shoulders. I wouldn't actually put my arms through the sleeves. And I would be walking through with this almost like a ghostly presence with a flowing, like even though it was my coat, it was hanging off to where it looked like a cape. So, like people would see me with a certain ominous look on my face and everything. And that the entire way through, like walking across Hollywood Boulevard all the way down Sunset Boulevard that way, people would part the ways for it because I'm a creepy bellhop. So actually that was more dedication to the role than most other people that I worked with did because I considered it like the moment that I got out of my car and got inside of the park and everything. I was on stage and I was performing that role religiously at that point, and I didn't want to break the immersion that everyone else have with it, because one of the things that I also noticed, is just like not to crass aspersions at my fellow alumni bellhops from the Hollywood Tower Hotel, but like I always thought it was kind of gross when they come in with like backpacks on and like cell phones hanging out and everything, and I just really didn't I didn't like that at all. So So I was playing the role the entire time for the guest during that time period, because I actually take it seriously when people would say, it's just like, yeah, when you're on stage, you're on stage, even if you're off the clock. And that even extended to my accessories. So I had, like I don't like digital watches anyway, but I always had an analog watch, and for a long while I had a watch that I designed personally that had the HTH logo on it, and it also had little lightning bolts in it, and it had a shadow of the 5 after 8 o'clock time period on there, because as the story goes, when you're working at the Tower of Terror, is that you were the bellhops on staff in that 1939 fateful night. And so if I was taken at that point, then those numbers would be on my watch face, shadowed out the entire time. So I was bringing Imagineering level story and intricacy down to things even so much as my wristwatch. So that's that's the reason why I carried an umbrella even when it was sun shining at the time.
You're like a regular Oswald Cobblepot.
Oh no.
Don't worry, not everybody will get the reference, and most people are too lazy to Google it.
Oh my! I had a better nose than him. I would hope so.
Well, it was just more of the umbrella, and
Mm-hmm.
and then in my mind the pocket watch, and then there's a monocle. I added the monocle.
I did have a pocket watch for a little while, but that didn't work. That didn't work at Tower. So some other guys that were diehards, they had pocket watches. Also, for a little while, I wore white gloves, but then some people got huffy, and they were just like, not everybody wears white gloves, and you shouldn't be that different about it. So I'm like, okay, fine, I'll conform a little bit.
Did you work with TJ?
Oh, always, yeah. So
He's fantastic.
he was Master TJ then for me, in a very, like a Padawan Jedi sort of thing. So it was, he was one of course, the founding members of it, and he was one of the creators for performance theming. My characterization was a little bit closer to Graydon Van Ert, which is a lot more sardonic, and it has a darker twinge to it. There's a little bit more sarcasm for that. I've tried to excise as much as that as possible in my personal self, because it's a very powerful and addictive habit forming drug to do that, but it also doesn't create any friends or any sort of lasting relationship. So I try to remain sincere as possible at all times, despite recent developments that have been occurring in social media, particularly on Twitter/X.
I don't understand anything about sarcasm. So going back to what we, by the way, did you like that pivot? Because I got you completely off the political rant.
Oh yeah, that's great. Yes, exactly.
And I still didn't tell you how I knew that, and I refused to.
I assume that you've talked to people, so
people come to me. I didn't go seeking out this information.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I didn't I wasn't curious what you carried on your person when you were a cast member.
That's yeah. We'll have to talk about that offline.
No, we won't. No, I'm just kidding. But let's go back. You were talking about the Snow White live action in respect to an agenda. I was talking about it just in respect to, you're going to go down the road of trying to bring the Seven Dwarves to life through photorealistic animation. You are going to upset the apple cart no matter which way you go with this. Like, correct, why would you even go down that road?
Yeah, well, my thing about it is just like, so first of all, I think that, like, there should be a certain sacredness to Snow White.
Oh yeah.
And really, my love and respect for Snow White also fuels my hatred for Toy Story. They're very much in connection with each other. So in a backhanded compliment sort of way, it's just like, I find it profoundly repugnant when Toy Story is elevated to this deified state and saying just like, oh yeah, it's this generation's Snow White. I'm like, no, the reason why you chose Toy Story over the five stories that you had going at Pixar before you decided to do a feature film is because it was the easiest one to produce. It also has and again, I'm probably going to lose some of your audience and everything, but it's a vapid message that's associated with it. It's also wasn't as technologically complex as Snow White. I mean, Snow White. I mean, you're talking about a film that it has. Its backgrounds, its stylistic thing is off of Gustav Tengren, which is extraordinarily complex and very, very complicated for people to do. And we're talking about a film that was made in facilities that did not have air conditioning. It was just invented before they started with.
Let's just talk about the fact that it was made on film.
Yeah, made on film, and it was also, like if it now also to pivot and everything. I'm like, the Snow White movie that I really want to see is a biopic about the entire making of the film, because the making of the film, if you study it and everything, this is a high drama piece. This is a film that really screams to be made. I mean, it starts in 1955, 1935, where Walt treats all of his animators to a nice dinner across the street, comes into the Hyperion studio, and gets on stage, solely on stage at the studio, and starts to tell the entire story of Snow White cold. He doesn't say anything about it. He just said, "Let me just tell you a story about this. There's a girl who is inside of a castle, blah 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 blah," and he tells the entire story. He does voices. He does does all of the characters. He does it as a single one-man show. Everyone thinks that it's the greatest thing that they've ever seen. They're so impressed with it. My God, this is your boss talking about this. Like, why would your boss ever perform a one-man show in front of his employees? I mean, that just is mind-boggling if you want to get it into today's terms. But in any case, he gets to the end of it, and then he drops the bombshell on them. It's just like, okay, this is going to be our first feature-length cartoon. This is going to be the first one that we're going to do with that.
Which, by the way,
next 2 years
is an innovation in of itself, because nobody thought you could sustain a story in cartoon form for the length of a feature film.
Yes, yeah, and there was a lot of people that chided him for that because they were thinking in terms of animated shorts. In fact, when he first started the production of it, he thought that it was going to be like, okay, well, basically it's like eight cartoons put together, but it ended up being significantly more complicated than that. And they had their sweatbox sessions, and then they had falling out with the financials, and then you have the bankers that are there, and the bankers are. They watched an assembled rough cut of the film, which they, by the way, almost no one ever did at that time period, and especially Walt Disney being the perfectionist that he was at that time period. That was cringy for even him. They watch the entire film. They say nothing. They walk out, and then they walk to their cars, and then here's Walt and Roy coming up like little boys looking for lunch money. And they're just like, well, what did you think of the film? And they're just like, oh, it's amazing. You have all the money that you need to get this done. And then you get done with the thing. You have an enormous premiere, and then if you want to take it to what happens after that, then it becomes an R-rated film. But that's an entirely different kind of discussion for another time period. But still, it's just like that's the story that I actually want to see. That's a Walt Disney. That is a Snow White feature-length film that the company should be producing, but isn't, because they really don't care about the actual thing. They're just looking for a cash grab, and they're also looking to change the narrative.
Well, but that's just they'll never tell the true story because it doesn't fit the agenda of the company. Now, I'll bite on Toy Story, and look, if you want to, we could do a whole uncensored thing where we just go off the rails with politics, and you could talk about the Snow White stuff, like whatever. I don't mind doing that another time. But right now, I will bite on what you said about Toy Story. I do agree that while it was a huge technical achievement at its time, it really was not that big of a leap forward when you compare it to what Snow White did at its time. But what were you saying about the agenda of the story?
It's a new year, which means it's time to spice up your kitchen with Pampered Chef. Pampered Chef has all the goodies, from spatulas, mandolins, and amazing pots and pans, not to mention knives. So go check out Colleen Herman at pamperedchef.com/PWS/Colleen Herman, and don't miss out on the small appliances like the deluxe air fryer and coffee maker. So spice up your kitchen today. pamperedchef.com/PWS/Colleen Herman. And with no estate plan, you could be leaving those you love the most with high taxes, probate fees, and an incomplete or divided estate and legal fights and fees. If you live in Florida, contact RK Law for a free consultation to discuss the options and tools you have available to protect your home, savings, and estate for those you love the most. To get started, send an email to russell@rklawpro.com. That's russell@rklawpro.com, or call 786-566-2456 to set up your consultation today. Last minute shipping from the parks, my friends at the UPS store have you covered. And even if you're local, they have lots of services from P.O. boxes to notaries. So go check out my friends at the UPS store, 6526 Old Brick Road, located right behind the Magic Kingdom. And as always, William Bailey Travel is available to help you plan your next vacation. So whether you're going to Disney, a cruise, a Disney cruise, or just looking to explore the world, William provides a customizable experience at competitive rates. You can reach out to William at william.bailey@academytravel.com, william.bailey@academytravel.com.
Well, I just think that it doesn't really speak to one of the other reasons, not just from a technical or artistic achievement. I think that Toy Story is also has somewhat of a vapid theme to it. It's just like, okay, so your toys come alive and everything, and they don't feel loved unless they're loved by a child and everything. I'm just saying, like, that doesn't really speak to any kind of emotional resonance for people from a cross-generational perspective.
Right.
There's also something to be said with the literal and figurative plastic nature of this, because you're dealing with, and again, I don't like the negative connotations with this term primarily, but in this case, I think it holds value, which is there's a certain materialistic undertone to the entire thing, and I'm just saying, like, yeah, like you're just not Snow White. You're just not Snow White in any way. You'll never be Snow White. There can be other Snow Whites in the world. It's like you can look at like the original Star Wars as being something similar to that. Even though I've said time and time and again, I'm not necessarily a Star Wars fan. I am a massive George Lucas fan, but that's an entirely different conversation. But still, it's just like, at least they're speaking to higher concepts. They're speaking to meta narratives. They're really engaging with the human soul and the human experience on a profound level rather than a superficial level, which is what Toy Story is.
Well, was it The Brave Little Toaster? Was that the movie? The first little short? Wouldn't that be more like Snow White?
Well, Brave Little say that again. It's the Brave Little Tailor.
Wasn't the Brave Little Toaster the whole the little Ed Catmull short that they were shopping around?
Well, that one was the one that was directed by Jerry Reese, which I've recently come in contact with, and he's wonderful. But that one, it's kind of a rehash of that. And that one was done, with traditional 2D animation and everything. But also, it was like I recently watched an analysis of the Brave Little Toaster, and it's just saying, like, that is a horror show all the way through. I mean, it's still a great movie, but still, it's just like, wow, there's some really disturbing stuff. But still, it's more dynamic than Toy Story, definitely.
The story of what Ed and John went through to get to where they had to get before they ever even were talking about making a feature film. I mean, there are parallels in the early days of Pixar to the early days of what Walt was doing when he was animating Steamboat Willie and all that stuff.
Yes, yeah.
There are parallels there just because of them being, doing animated shorts and pushing technical bounds and then pushing into Again, people didn't think you could use 3D animation to sustain a motion picture, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's interesting, to kind of move this conversation in a slightly different direction, what's interesting...
Oh, we can do that. We can move to a completely different direction. It's fine.
No. I mean, I'm just trying to move it along, but
Yeah.
it's on my list of things to talk about anyway. And I know you love this topic. But that first Pixar movie, that first Toy Story movie, is a major marker in the shift in the Walt Disney Company as a whole. And I would suggest that that is really the line in the sand for Bob Iger. You said this the last time we talked, that Bob Iger had an agenda to kind of wipe out anything Eisner did and to prop up his acquisitions. And he's the guy that came in and saved the Pixar relationship.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and the reason why he did that is because he inverted the acquisition relationship. Like the reason why it didn't go through with Eisner is because Eisner was the CEO of the Walt Disney Company. And the reason why it went through with Iger is because Iger operates as if he's still the president of ABC Capital Cities, where he just looks at these as individual properties that are meant to be acquired, and he'll make whatever deal that he has to with it. As part of the original contractual negotiations for the acquisition of Pixar under Eisner, is that they wanted basically a non-compete clause with Walt Disney Animation.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted that mothball. That was part of the actual understanding with that. Now, of course, Eisner is not going to agree with that, because Eisner knows that the Disney brand, despite anything that they're doing at that little place in Emeryville, it's just like the Disney brand is always going to be much more of a perennial than anything that Pixar is actually going to do, which is still true to this day. And what he decided is, so he's just like, no, I'm definitely not going to get rid of my studio in order to acquire yours. I'm sorry, that's just not going to happen. In fact, what his objective was is that he wanted to purchase Pixar and do what you're supposed to do with acquisitions, and he was going to basically eliminate that as a label, and then he was just going to put all of the staff and everyone else that's associated with Pixar into Walt Disney Animation. So there would still only be one Disney animated studio. It wouldn't be these two, which basically now you can't tell the difference between them because they're so muddled together.
Well, that was also at a time when they were doing 3D animation. So they were doing, oh my gosh, what was it? Chicken Little?
Yes, yeah.
Right.
And they did Dinosaur as well. Dinosaur is like a precursor to what they did with the Lion King, that sort of thing.
So, but there really, it wasn't just, Pixar will be the 3D arm. They literally, there was a distinct, it was redundancy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, but and really, like with Iger, he bent the culture of the company in order to appease Pixar, and you just can't do that. You're supposed to see the CEO of the Walt Disney Company. You're not the CEO of the Pixar company. It's just like in one bought the other. It's just like it wasn't like that. You just don't do that in any sort of business sense. And I'm not saying that just because of like business standards and practices and everything. Like, it's just common sense that like you would want to, if you were going to acquire a smaller company, you would want to integrate the great things that they've got going on with the much greater stuff that you've always had going on at your company. I mean, that's the reason why these things happen, but it's the exact opposite with every single one of these. And as a result of that, the parent company has been enormously crippled. And you would talk to people on the street now, it's just like, well, what does Disney mean to you? besides that wonderful, wonderful Tom K. Morris definition of it, which is more accurate than anything else. But you look at it just like, oh yeah, like a man on the street, just like what does Disney do? Just say, well, don't they own that Marvel thing? And oh yeah, they have Star Wars too, and they haven't been doing too well with that either. And oh yeah, they have Pixar. Just like, I'm like, they'll end up going down the line of the acquisitions, but almost rarely, if ever, will they come down to the actual core company, which is primarily a theme park company.
But the core company,
not a tech company.
The irony that the core company was always, in a weird way, a holding company for characters. And I always felt that the reason it made sense for them to own the Muppets was because what better place to shepherd one man's characters than Disney?
Uh-huh. Yes.
But with Iger, now that everything's been reduced down to a cost center, there's no story there, right? So you don't even understand. Like you talk about, oh yeah, don't they own Marvel? But then forget it if you even ask them, name a Marvel character, and now tell me who created that character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like there's no recognition again for Stan Lee anywhere within the Walt Disney Company. So is it a choice by Iger to justify his acquisitions, or is it an actual vendetta against Michael Eisner, or is it a bit of both?
Well, I think it definitely is both. I think that like one doesn't cancel out the other. When you're dealing with this, I mean, like Bob Iger will tell you in his own autobiography that he never got along with Eisner, and that he thought that the moment that he was going to be selected for CEO, that he was going to be going in there to get fired, essentially. So, would probably be an amazing thing for them to actually do. I haven't gotten all the way into the weeds on that so far as an investigation, but in any case, with him taking his acquisitions as the priority, he looks at it as the latest thing. It's just like, it's a very kind of it's one of those disgusting, like, little Hollywood things that has happened since the beginning of the studio system, where you have men who are, like, if you're talking about like Irving Thalberg, he was the youngest, which was in his 30s. But you're talking about men now that are septuagenarians, but also, like, you can go up to ones that are like in their 60s that are trying to retain their youth. So they want to see what the youths are doing now. So they always chase after the youth for it, because they're going to be the market that's going to propel us to the future. Meanwhile, the youth don't have any of the money and don't make any of the decisions in society. So you really should be shooting for not the people that are 16 to 26, but maybe you should be going for the people that are, around 40 to 50, the people that actually have the buying power in society. But nevertheless, they've never thought about that inside of Hollywood anyway. And he just looks at, okay, one of the things that, like he said about it when he was talking about this, is that they were at the opening of Hong Kong Disneyland. And he noticed just like, oh yeah, the characters that are from Pixar are resonating more with the Chinese audience than the traditional Disney characters. Well, of course that's going to happen. Of course it is, because these people have seen them inside the theaters just 5 seconds ago. They don't have any historical lineage to the Walt Disney Company, and you're going to focus your entire efforts on doing that, which appeases an audience that isn't even one that is your main driver. I mean, yeah, but it's really convenient for you, Bob. Oh yeah, isn't it convenient that they're resonating with the stuff that you just purchased?
Well, he even said in his book, he's like, I went into the parks, I looked around, and everything was Pixar, and I was like, I got to save this deal. So, I mean, I get it, but at the same time, if you're not, one of the things Eisner used to do, that whole vault era. So they would bring things out and remind you of them.
That was the Chapek thing, but yes, it was yeah.
But it was the Eisner era.
Eisner era, yeah, but Chapek created. Yeah,
yeah, nobody even knew who Bob Chapek was, but yeah.
Yeah.
Fair. But like so if you're not reminding people of those other things, then yeah, of course they're going to point to the newest thing that you showed them in theaters. But like Eisner came in and said, no, we're sitting on a vault. Let's literally unearth these treasures and monetize them. And I feel like with Iger, it's like, no. Everything from Pixar forward is our focus. And they have just basically shot themselves in the foot by not spending any time on reminding people of what's in the archive. And that's where that, I'm afraid to say it, that's where that ceiling probably hits. Because at a certain point, when you beat Star Wars to death and you beat Frozen to death, okay, there's no legacy characters left because you haven't been honoring them. Then what are you left with? You're just left with the crumbs of Star Wars and Marvel and Frozen 5?
Yeah, and that's where I think that we're going to start things are going to start getting interesting with that, because his business plan or his modus operandi with this whole entire thing, like, yeah, you can do that, but you do have to also honor your legacy. You need to be putting things on Disney Plus, like the Walt Disney Anthology series. I mean, people talk about like how horribly crippling the streaming services are. I'm like, no, streaming services could be amazing. They're just badly managed. It's just like, think about like, like they have somewhere in the neighborhood of like 30 plus years times 52 episodes of the Walt Disney Anthology series that most, like 99.9% of those are not even on Disney Plus. So what if you released one of those per week, or one of those per day? Per day, you would still end up having like years of material there that would actually help you with your churn situation. There are hundreds upon hundreds. There's 700 Disney created titles which are not on Disney Plus right now. And if you did that, then you would have the brand recognition. One of the reasons why, it seems kind of weird if you were looking at it just from a very low resolution perspective. It doesn't really make sense that people in their 40s right now would have such a reverence and respect and a knowledge of the classic Walt Disney era, except for the fact that the Disney Channel existed in the 1980s.
They were raised on it.
Yeah. So it's just like, you have 1980s kids that were raised on 30s to 1960s material the entire way through. And the reason why it was because, you turn on the television and there it was, and you saw that, and you see the amazingness of those properties. And one of the reasons why it's so amazing is because of the scarcity of it. I think that we completely forget nowadays that Disney wasn't pervasive in all of the culture for every single thing all the time. It was a very special thing.
Yeah.
I remember having when and people like Dennis Miller said this on one of the specials, where it's just like, you watch Walt Disney Presents on Sunday night, and it was kind of like the last gas station before you reach the school desert that was the entire rest of the week. And you would feel the pangs of loss when like the credits roll, and just like, okay, great, this is over now, and I have to get back into reality and going back to high school or whatever it is. It's just like we don't have that anymore. And children today don't really have a love and respect for this nearly as much as they did in recent generations. And if you don't have that die-hard mentality with that, you have nothing left. If you want to just do the here and now, the be this and be it, that be the end, then congratulations, you're universal. And no one cares about what they do, and no one holds them to any particular standard, and no one definitely pays the exorbitant prices that you're requiring for everything else, and the hoops that you have to jump through, and just to be able to enjoy a Disney vacation or a Disney experience. With those things, I mean, like you're really killing off the magic bullet that you have that no other organization in Hollywood has. No one else has this kind of brand loyalty and emotional attachment to it than Disney does, and they're throwing it away.
And it's fascinating to see so many, whether it's a YouTube site or somebody on Twitter, but so many people that like are clearly have defined their presence online by Disney being completely repulsed by what's gone on. You know, these last couple of years, these post Chapek years have been like a conscious decision to just flip off everybody that grew up on Disney. And when I say everybody that grew up on it, because that's generations upon generations. That's not one generation, but people grew up on that very special thing you're talking about. I remember wanting to know what that Disney animated movie was going to be every summer. And when you saw that logo pop up on the screen for the trailer, you knew you were in for a treat.
Yeah, and you know, like, you know, I remember, you know, I was just saying, a couple months ago, for the first time in a very long time, I got to watch a classic 1960s Disney movie for the first time, which is it's a stupidly titled thing. It's Horse in a Gray Flannel Suit. Stars Dean Jones, and it's about it's about equestrian racing, an equestrian competition. And I don't care about that. I don't care about horses. I don't care about any of that stuff. But, you know, it was wonderful. You know, like if you can get a movie that makes people care about it, it's great. Yeah, and when I was watching it and everything, you know, I got to the end of the movie and it was so wonderful and everything with the way that they wrapped it up and the way that the characters resolved the issues and the writing competition. I was actually, you know, interested and invested in something that I don't care about in real life, which is amazing there too. And then I just felt this enormous joy and appreciation for life that I used to have with Disney movies beforehand. Because, you know, like when you watch 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea 3 or 4 for many, many years, you know, it kind of loses its thrill, just like every other thing loses its thrill. I mean, you still appreciate it, but you don't get necessarily the same emotional resonance that you feel when you watch it for the first time. And I'm watching this again, silly, low budget comedy with Dean Jones in it, and I'm just like, wow, that was just a wonderful experience. That was just and you know, like they don't have that today with anyone, and just to. And to think about the enormous loss that incurs, and when you're talking about people that are online that make that part of their identity, you know, it's just like you can do that onto two spectrums. I think that you could have the people that, you know, are the Iger stands, and then you have the people that are the Disney stands, and I'm on the side of that, you know, like, you know, trying to remind people of what the potential is for this institution and this brand and what it has, what the possibilities that could exist with it, and then you have the other ones which are, I support the current thing and the current people that are in charge, and they say that that's good and that's what it's going to be, and I'm not going to fight that at all, even if it means that I will lose my entire livelihood over it. I will go to bat for people that don't even care about me.
It's almost like you're looking at my list of notes, because you're taking me right where I want to go next. And those are the people that are, you know, that they either have media passes and they don't want to lose them, or they're hoping if they hold out that they'll get them. You know, Disney announced the other day, or it's been announced, that a bunch of these companies are looking at what Amazon did with Mr. Beast, and they want to reach out to influencers and start creating content around influencers. The type of person that Disney's going to do business with is a very limited type of person. And at the end of the day, if you think that by just giving in and playing along, you're going to get some access, you're not going to get it. They've got their list. They've got their people. And everybody knows who they are. I don't even care. I'll just say it. I mean, Tom is the biggest shill. Okay. Yeah. And you know, so anybody who's coming along with their little audience, hoping that they can sort of play that game and they don't need you. They don't need you. They've got their army of shills. But anybody that really cares about the company and doesn't care about access is going to err on the side of everything you're currently doing is antithetical to what the founder set out to accomplish. Period.
Yeah, and the problem there's so many problems that exist with that. So if you're just going to be going along with what the status quo is, and I think that it's undisputed that the status quo is unsustainable. It is not nearly the way that it should be. Well, then you do so at your peril. Like you have somebody like Tom who is totally, and I don't want to talk about this a lot because I've talked about it way too much, and I'm basically their defense attorney. I'm not super into it, but and I'm really tired of talking about it, but I'll use this one example, then we'll move on really quick.
I don't even know what you're talking about. That's the best part.
Is that Tom was gung-ho, save Splash Mountain, up until 5 seconds after he they gave us a new media pass. And then he was just like, oh yeah, sure, it's old, it's tired and everything, and you're a bigot for liking it. Literally, that happened within the span of a week.
Well, listen,
totally for it, and then totally against it. And if you notice too, one of the things, because I don't really follow him too much on there, but I watch his content and just occasionally just to see what kind of ridiculous blather that he decides to go on for. I'm like, oh, well, maybe he will say this or he won't say that on it. And one of the things that I find interesting about it is that in order to appear to be unbiased, he will pick certain issues and he will fight for them against the company, but it's things that have no consequence whatsoever.
Right.
It's things that you're just like, okay, so let me get this straight. So saving Muppets is important to you right now, but saving the rivers of America is not.
But he also knows that.
Explain that to me.
But because one is a hot button issue, the rivers, there's actually the potential for that project to get stopped or altered, and we'll get to that. But with Muppets, he knows he can go out there and cry, but nothing's going to change.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's the illusion that he isn't bought, but actually he really is bought.
So I don't get a lot of media access, but I was at an event. There is some media that I get invited to, and he was there, as he would be. Mm-hmm. And all I could think was, oh my gosh, like I'm supposed to cover this event, but all I want to do is like man on the street and go up to him. But like I didn't have the questions prepared. Otherwise, I would have. But I think the next time I get invited to a media event, I think I should be prepared and just not ambush him in an aggressive way, but in a journalistic way, and just hit him with all the necessary questions. Just because he won't know what to do.
No, he won't. And I've only been to one event that he was also at that I never actually engaged with him, which was the closing of the Great Movie Ride. He, it's just like, and that's the thing that I don't understand about certain people. I'm just like, and I think that the reason why I'm like, look, okay, you can take people, other quote unquote influencers and YouTubers and everything that are relatively young, that are probably misguided in their assumptions about this or that or the other thing. But when you love the Great Movie Rides as passionately as he did and as passionately as I still do, and that you don't see that that's a natural progression from things like Rivers of America or any of the other things that they've taken out, like they're taking out dinosaurs just as a concept from Animal Kingdom. I mean, like no one could defend Dino-Rama. I'm not here to defend Dino-Rama. I am here to defend extinct animals in a park where its dedication plaque says kingdom dedicated to animals, real imagined and extinct. I am here to defend that, but
you don't want to advocate for Chester and Hester?
No, I don't, because I think it's horrible, and that's mostly an aesthetic question. But aesthetics are still important because you're dealing with an aesthetic
It's
company.
so cheap.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. That's the problem. And it's because first of all, I don't have enough time in my life for this. But secondly, just
Welcome
like
to my world.
I couldn't support. Like I went on Dinosaur, in like October probably for the last time, and like. The problem with this is the problem that I had with the universe of energy is that that you cannot get a groundswell of people to object to this change because they are only going to see it as its current incarnation. They're not going to see it as the potential that could actually be there. So when you're talking about something like universe of energy, I profoundly hate that cosmic rewind thing for multiple reasons. But one of the biggest was, and I've been on other people's shows that don't give a care about what I have to say about that, and just like, well, they're having a good time with it, and I don't really care about it, so we're just going to move on to the next issue, Joshua.
I don't want to
But
hear what you have to say about it. Let's move on.
yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah. So
No, I'm serious. No, wait, go on. I'm listening.
okay, yeah, okay. But my retort with this is just like, okay, well, do you like your gas prices? Do you think that we have the entire energy economy and everything all sorted out? Because if we don't, that's the reason why that attraction format,
Okay,
not necessarily the Allen thing.
So they don't
how
want to
the format
talk to you about education and Epcot.
right, which is the reason why it exists.
Right.
It's a three-pronged approach. It's not supposed to be, it's just like, it's dedicated to a park that entertains, informs, and inspires. And by the way, that was written by Marty Sklar. And if you look at Marty Sklar's prose and how he does things, whenever he lists things, he lists them in ascending importance, not descending. So when you say entertain, inform, and inspire,
Right.
the most important part is the inspiration.
But I understand the notion that, oh yeah, they're having fun on Guardians, but yeah, it does not fit in the park, and I love that ride.
Yeah, and that's fine. You can like the ride, but it, again, in the wrong place, which is the entire reason why the parks exist in a cohesive unit to begin with. Like people nowadays are groaning and complaining about it. It's just like, why are you sweating the small details on stuff? And I'm like, because Disney is detail.
Well, that's the problem. And when you realize that Disney's got it figured out to the point that, listen, nobody cares anymore, even though Walt did. And people just want to feel like they got on as many rides as possible. And as long as we can get them on as many things as possible, it doesn't matter what we're charging.
Yeah, but and I get that. And it makes sense from a spreadsheet perspective, but from a longevity perspective, it's completely deficient because what you are really selling is you're selling the emotional attachment to these experiences, and when it's vapid and it really doesn't speak to any sort of part of the human condition, when there's nothing that actually ties it back to something that's real, then you're not going to get the brand loyalty that you have now.
And the wild thing about that, Joshua, is that the proof is in the pudding, and the proof is Disneyland, and the Walt Disney Company, for all the data that they lean on, can't even look at the data that is Disneyland and look at that and go, oh wow, it does mean something. That attention to detail, those differentiators, those are the difference. And that is why Disneyland was able to kick off something that all these years later is still standing.
Yes, and it's one of the most populous parks on the planet, and it still remains so. Like 70 plus years after it was founded, and despite its extremely small footprint in comparison to all the other ones, it's just like it's an enormous testament to how they were doing with it. The problem with it is that now like you can't catalog brand loyalty. You can't put these things on a spreadsheet, and the problem with that is that it is not that, okay, well, then we just need to find a right marker for it. No, the problem with it is the spreadsheets themselves. The problem with it is that you've been worshiping at the altar of metadata or big data or whatever it is that you decided to call it this year, and that doesn't account for most of your, I believe the word is intangibles. Because when you're looking for, that's very hard to measure. And the problem with that is that now we have bean counters in charge where we don't have actual people that, have any sort of creativity or, for lack of a less passionate word, a soul to what they're actually doing. There's no soul there. There's just there's just, okay, well then this is the metric for this and this is the metric for that. So we're going to go on this direction rather than that direction. Well, that will only take you so far, because when you're looking at things like statistics tell you where you were. It doesn't tell you where you're going to go.
No, you can only project out off of what the data is. So if your data is bad, your projections are bad.
Also, even if your projections are extraordinarily accurate, the further away you get from right now, the less accurate that it is going to be over time. So it's like we can have a really good indication about what Disney stock price is going to be for tomorrow. Like you get like a 95% certainty about that. And then it goes progressively down. It's just like, okay, well, where's Disney going to be in 5 years? 5 years from now? Well, your accuracy rating is probably going to be around 20%. So, and that goes with everything.
Well, that's literally that brings us right back to the top of the conversation, because in this actual moment, the stock is ticking up in the short term because of the perception of the earnings. But then, as the distance is created, as that call goes behind us and becomes history, that doubt will kick in again. Because Epic Universe is opening up, construction is popping up all over Disney World, so that doubt will kick in. It's inevitable.
Yeah. And they won't report on that, by the way. No one's going to care. Even you and I, even people that are the financial gurus and everything, they're not going to care next week. Say, or whenever, like pick like a month after the earnings call, no one's gonna notice that. Oh yeah, all that gain that we had during the earnings call, yeah, that's gone way down. Except of course if it fulfills a narrative for them. But I don't. But again, back to the entire thing, I don't give stock price any indication of actual corporate health. So
no, it just, if anything, it's an echo chamber. I have to say this. This is kind of another tangent, but it's going to get me where I want to go, and we'll wrap this up.
That's fine.
I am of the opinion that a lot of these bad decisions, are the reason. A lot of these bad barometers for decision making are the reason we have Galaxy's Edge West outside the berm in Disneyland. Like, that would have never happened with Michael Eisner, ever.
Yeah. And really, like I love Disneyland and everything, but I feel so sorry for that park that it's just like, okay, look, having Galaxy's Edge, which is a prime example. I say it's a forensic, forensically, it's a fascinating study on everything that you should never do with the art form of Imagineering. I mean, it's a vast perversion of everything that stands for. And I'm sorry that it happened to my home park of the once Disney MGM Studios, now Hollywood Studios, is that I'm like, I feel sorry for that, but I feel much more sorry for the deformity that they did with Disneyland for that. I mean, you look at an aerial photo and it looks like a cancerous cell.
And no, literally,
it actually is a cancerous cell.
It's a pimple.
Yeah, and this is all and also it's a different conversation, but I'm just like, so you devoted all this time and energy and effort and finances and everything into this one area, but meanwhile your Tomorrowland is still in the worst shape of all of them, which is kind of like amazing to think of. It's just like, okay, Disneyland, your premier park and everything, is that you have the worst Tomorrowland on the planet.
Right.
Is the one there. Now, the reason why it's that way is because You have people that are inside inside of these things. They have no vision for the future. They have no actual optimism that's associated with anything, which is to everyone's disadvantage for that. And that's the reason why they can't come up with a cohesive theme for Tomorrowland, because they don't even know what that is anymore. I do. I've spent an enormous amount of time focused on that, and I've produced a whole film relating to that topic. But they don't have any of that, so they just kind of leave it abandoned for generations now at a time. But meanwhile, they'll go ahead and they'll focus on putting inside of Disneyland California a galactic ghetto in the back end of it, and really, there's nothing inspirational about that. There's nothing that like speaks to the ethos of Disneyland. There's no the plaque that goes over the train station entrance. It's just like, here you leave today and enter the world of yesterday, tomorrow, and fantasy. And it's just like, it doesn't focus on any of those. It's not particularly fantastic. It's not about tomorrow, and it's not about yesterday either. It's
actually an odd blend of all of those.
Yeah.
Because Star Wars is actually in the past, not the future, but most folks won't perceive it that way. They'll look at it as sci-fi.
Yeah.
So what's interesting to me, though, is that it exists outside the berm. And I'm a huge Star Wars fan, like more than I can explain. Okay. And I could do hours on just the minutia of Star Wars. So I loved going there the first time. It was an amazing thing. But if you really stop to think about it, like going outside the berm, that alone should have been a no.
And the reason why that was done, of course, was an aesthetic reason, because there's no way to actually integrate it into Disneyland.
Well, nor should you.
Its own nor should you, because it's incompatible with it. And I was just recently on a historical based show about this and everything, but I've made the observation independently before. Is just like, that Disney has lost, or specifically Imagineering has lost the ability to crossfade, which is an amazing technique when you think about it, because when you're going through things like you're going from Adventureland, if you're talking about Disneyland Adventureland into New Orleans Square, the architecture crossfades. If you're looking at something like It's a Small World that leads into Toontown, there's a section of that architecture which does crossfade into Toontown. And so these things are done very, very subtly. Well, now, with everything that they're doing, especially with all of these new lands and everything, it is a hard fade out to nothing but florist, and then a fade into whatever area that you're there, which means that you're not integrated, which means that you have all this dead space inside of their park, which is also extraordinarily inefficient. But it also, like you notice the change in that. You shouldn't be able to notice any of these changes. It should just be, like for generations. Think about how weird this is. It's just like, so when you're in Magic Kingdom, you go from colonial America into Bavaria in the process of 5 seconds and don't think a single thing about it. I mean, like, that's an amazing achievement from an architectural and design perspective, that you don't notice the difference between colonial America and Bavaria. But meanwhile, when you go from Frontierland to Batuu, it's definitely noticeable.
But I always thought that they did a good job with that transition. But now that you're saying it, the reason they did a good job with that transition is because it's a crossfade into Black Leader, and the Black Leader is just trees.
Yeah,
and I always liked that. I was like, oh wow, you really do feel like you're going off planet. But that's really a tunnel out of the berm.
Yes.
And so it always felt to me like, yes, you're going off planet. So I could justify it. But just the very fact that you had to break the berm should have been the end of the conversation. And they should have put it where Cars was, or where Cars is. And I will also go out and I'm somebody, I spent 2 decades in LA. Cars Land is completely overrated. Cars Land is worse than Galaxy's Edge.
I wouldn't push back on that.
It's one big e-ticket, and the rest of it is dreck.
Well, yeah, and that speaks to the whole entire thing about, like, you know, I said I wasn't going to do this, but my brain is going there anyway. Please stop me. No,
I'm not stopping you. Go on.
So when they're dealing with things like people are looking at Universal, Epic Universe and everything, and they're looking at it as a low-grade form of what they learned in their high school economic class, which is just like, okay, look, it's good for competition because then they'll do better, and then we, the consumer, get everything better for us. I'm like, well, no, because Disney learned all the wrong lessons from the Wizarding World, which is Wizarding World is a mini land that only deals with a specific one specific IP. And the problem with that is that, yes, you're getting the ever so overused term of immersion with that, but you're also consuming a massive amount of the acreage. It takes enormous amounts of time and effort to get those things upgraded and upstarted and everything. But then, I was part of the naive group too when I saw, like, oh, look, they're doing Wizarding World, which is very much on par with Disney. And the reason why that is because it was developed originally by Disney, and then they lost out on the contract negotiations. Tony Baxter said this explicitly 2 years ago. But in any case, so they get that done. And what did Disney do? They took the wrong lesson from Universal, where they said that it was just like, oh, okay, we can produce mini lands of our own, and we can go ahead and we can consume massive amounts of our acreage and different parks and everything to tout off this one e-ticket attraction. But we're going to put lots of stuff in between it that has to do with that one specific theme. And as a result of that, they become more like their competition, and their competition makes less money.
So what's interesting about that, though, is Toy Story Land is much closer to what Disney pitched J.K. Rowling for Harry Potter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was one concept with that, but I knew that the Kuka arm thing that was developed by Disney, the Forbidden Journey that was developed by Disney, and then there was some legal issues and stuff where they eventually Disney drugged their feet so long that it ended up going back in for. I'm going to get the terminology and everything wrong on this, but essentially what happened was they drugged their feet on actually starting construction or anything, so they lost the entire licensing opportunity, and then it just went over to Universal because they were more than happy to get started with it right away.
Yeah, it's almost like going the turnaround. Yeah, listen, it's the notion that competition is absolutely healthy, absolutely. But if you're not learning the right lessons, it's no different than having bad data. So I think this all goes back to having a vision. And when the people at the top are sort of Eisner, for all the micromanaging he did, he still let Imagineering be Imagineering.
Yeah.
Bob Iger's out there, literally pushing the needle when it comes to putting Cars in place of Rivers of America. Like, he didn't have to get involved.
Right. And also, you're putting the cart before the horse with this, because what he views the park as is he looks at them as billboards for the movies that are made.
Right.
I'm like, that is completely opposite the way that this works. That is not your parks are the ones that fuel your motion pictures, not the other way around. And why would you want to put up a billboard for a property which has already went outside of the theaters and already made all its money inside of home video or whatever it is that we want to talk about with the life cycle of a film? I mean, why would you want to consume a massive amount of park infrastructure in order to make that happen? I mean, that's insanity.
Why would you get in the way? In other words, if operations comes in and says, solve this problem, which, okay, fair. We don't want to maintain the island. The river's a pain in the butt. Solve this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Then let Imagineering do what they do best. And then, if you want to pick, but to go, no, listen, you're going to solve it with Cars.
Yeah.
That
Well,
is
then you're
the
not
square
presenting an
peg.
actual solution. You're trying to put this square peg in the round hole with this, and just like, and by the way, it's just like it doesn't go over too well when you try to do that. You cause a lot of damage with that, and I've said from day one on this one, it's not hyperbolic to say, and just like let me just preface with this, and just like, do you think that at any point is it conceivable that Walt Disney World become a complete thing of the past?
Yes.
Okay, so in the words of Jack Sparrow, it's just like, oh, so we agree in principle, now we're just haggling over price. So what point actually starts that? And I said in one of my posts and everything, it's just like, like the exhaust, the seemingly insignificant exhaust port on a deadly space station. The Rivers of America is very much that. I mean, I do think that it would start a domino chain effect for the entire company that will completely dismantle it. And it sounds completely crazy that anyone would ever say that. But if you look at it in a certain perspective, okay, so you're destroying the beauty of your park. You don't have anywhere that has any tranquil park-like spaces anymore. You've made it completely insufferable for people to actually go to it because it's so ridiculously crowded anyway, and they have no respite, and they have no way of even just the illusion of tranquility. And then people decide that they don't want to go because of all the other factors that you've also put in there, like having to be on the app and being able to struggle through all of these things and putting paywalls up for things that used to be free and blah 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 blah. And then so then you have your most popular and most important park, which is going to suffer tremendously for this, especially during the construction phase, which might last for 5 years.
You know
I
something?
don't think it would last for 5 years, but it might last for 5 years. And then that is it. The Magic Kingdom fuels Epcot. It fuels the studios. It fuels Animal Kingdom.
And that's your domino.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So people aren't going to if you didn't have the Magic Kingdom right now, if Magic Kingdom doesn't exist, do you go to Walt Disney World?
Nope.
I don't think that a lot of people do. I mean, and by the way, I'm the Epcot legacy guy. So,
No,
and I'm the person
listen,
who loves the studios, but I'm like, I know that it doesn't exist without that first.
There's nothing you said that I disagree with. I don't think that's an over-the-top statement. I think we just found the answer to the question of where is that ceiling, where is that moment, where is that intersection, and it's when that ride is open and that river is gone, and you have those little dune buggies zipping around. It's over.
Yeah, I mean, the picture being in the Haunted Mansion queue for that, and we have, like, sorry to say, I know that you're an LA guy, but you have the better pirates significantly.
LA has all the better. Anything that exists in Disneyland is better than the Disney World counter.
I would push back strongly with the Haunted Mansion, but here it is. It's like, in any case,
I could see that.
Getting to that.
Pre-show aside.
Yeah. So it also has it's the same exact situation as Pirates. It's just in the reverse. We have like 5 in Orlando. There are 5 more scenes. We have a much more cohesive exterior. Blah 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 blah. But anyway, you imagine doing that next to the vroom vroom of the kachowing cars next to it. It's just like that's going to pull you out of the environment, and that's the problem that you have with all of these uncohesive environments that they're trying to push up to anything else. Because one of the reasons why we love going to the parks is because they are devoid of contradictions. In our everyday life, when we go outside of our homes, and sometimes when you're actually in our homes, we're having to always kind of rejigger our mind. It's just like, okay, well, that's incongruent right there, and that doesn't make sense, and this is not there. Well, Disney, through the greatest art form that has ever been created, which is theme parks, and you need to think about them as an art form. And it's an art form, it's what I call, not to use my own hand on this, but it is the omni art form, which means that it encompasses every art form that has ever been created by humanity in that art form. They have used that in order to create a completely 360 cohesive environment where you don't have to focus on any of the contradictions. You don't have to censor your brain. You don't have to work overtime to make everything right in your head. It's all right there. You just go ahead and you absorb that, and that's the reason why we come out enormously rejuvenated, because we're not having to work with things like cognitive dissonance and all these other psychological things that we have to do because we live in a profoundly inharmonious environment. Well, it's a completely harmonious environment there, and that's the reason why we like it. Well, if you do all these things where I'm just like, okay, well, no, I have to, okay, I'm in the Haunted Mansion queue. Don't pay attention to the cars. Don't pay attention to this.
Well, not just
We're
noise.
right
It's like being in a blender.
Yeah. So
would you consider cinema to be history?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So then if theme parks are supposed to be the living representation of movies, then there would be a historical component to a theme park.
Yes, and you're leading me into thinking about, that whole entire thing where, like Walt Disney said that that Disneyland would never be a museum. Walt was saying that when the park was less than 10 years old. And a lot of the time when people use Walt Disney's name in vain,
right.
I'm a Christian, but at the same time, just like, yeah, but people misquote Walt Disney far more than they misquote Jesus.
It's selective.
Yeah. And so because whenever you're quoting somebody and whenever you're looking into a person's philosophy and everything, you always have to look at it within the context of the time, of the place that they said it.
You also have to look at the complete quote.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So he's looking at so when he says, it's just like it's not a museum, it's just like, well, of course it wasn't a museum. He was less than 10 years old. You've got lots of stuff to do.
But he also talked about plussing, and not everything is a plus.
No, it's not. Yeah. So I'm like, yeah, there are museum experiences inside of the Disney parks now. There are absolutely museum experiences.
The river is one of them.
The river is one of them. Hall of Presidents is one of them. American Adventure should be protected as a UNESCO site.
I would suggest that they could use CGI to take Elon out of it, but other than that, I
could omit him as well. But that's the beauty of.
See, you and I agree on most things. It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's fine. And completely different backgrounds. So it's kind of amazing that happens.
And we're probably upsetting everybody at the same time.
Yeah, so that's good. So that means that you're doing something right. If you're not upsetting somebody, then you're not doing your job.
Better than being boring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but you look at it, I'm like, yeah, sure. There's definitely historical precedents for this. And there was a whole line of questioning. This was in the last decade where people were just like, okay, is there anything sacred in Disney parks? And these moronic YouTubers, some of which have completely abandoned their channels, which is good, that they're just like, no, nothing is sacred. It's just like, if you can come up with a better plan for XYZ, then go ahead and have at them. It's like, well, no, I mean, like, you don't have to have a this or that with these types of situations. And the example that they use is just like, no, even the Haunted Mansion, it's just like, if you could come up with a better idea, I'm just like, there's no better idea than the Haunted Mansion being in the Haunted Mansion, and then you can come up with something somewhere else. You don't have to choose, oh, look, we have new Star.
But that was the idea of the blessing of size. Walt said, it doesn't have to be a museum, but he also said we have the blessing of size.
Exactly.
So things don't have to change, but we also have enough space that we don't have to change everything.
Right, and nor should you, because these are supposed to be building experience. You're supposed to be growing. You're supposed to, or the other the converse of that is you look at something like Disneyland Paris. Disneyland Paris has not had a major enhancement since 1995, and that's fine. I mean, it's doing extraordinarily well. It's the number one attended theme park in Europe right now. I mean, sure that they've had complications and they've had problems, but most of that's related to the fact that they developed all those resorts, which dragged down the entire Euro Disney enterprise, as those 5 hotels that constantly bring down the theme park. But in any case, the theme park itself, if you just took it in isolation, it's done extraordinarily well with very little investment. And that's the thing about it too. It's just like, when Chapek came in 2015, he came in with a series of prejudices. One of the prejudices prejudice is that that Imagineering takes far too long on the development of new attractions. Of course, he took too long on his construction of attractions, which is much more damaging. But in any case, the fact that they take so long to go in development, that's a feature. That's not a bug.
Oh, of course.
That's it, because you're dealing with, I mean, ideally, because the way that Chapek wanted to handle it and the way that I think that Iger was pushing him to handle it is that, you want to do this thing, and it's, and you know what, if it doesn't go over well on everything, then we'll just get rid of it in 10 years. I'm just like, well, no, then you're no different from Universal, and Universal is a lesser model.
And that's how they designed Avengers Campus.
Yeah, because it's just like, okay, you'll replace the blade. I'm like, no, you don't understand what the goal is for Imagineering. The goal is to create an attraction that will last for hopefully 30 years, but ideally forever. So only minimal improvements.
I'm gonna try to do two things at once here. So the river, my understanding is the front-facing side of the river will be preserved, if anything will be preserved. Okay. Mm-hmm. But if they replace it with something and they put in a Cars ride, whatever it is, I do agree that it won't last but 10 years. So while it'll probably get ripped out and replaced with another dumb ride, it's not out of the realm of possibility that somebody comes in and tries to restore it. That's a tall order.
Very. And there's very little financial incentive to do so, and that's part of the problem with it. And also the problem with the Chapek model of just replacing everything in 10 years, nothing gets replaced in 10 years.
Well,
that for like 70 years and 12 theme parks around the world, nothing gets replaced in 10 years. Absolutely nothing. They don't have enough budget for it. They don't have enough to rotate these things out. So 10 years becomes 20 years, becomes 25 years, and you might think, oh, okay, that's fine. I'm just like, no, because then you have deficiencies all over your park, and then eventually people just stop coming.
They don't have the capability to plan like that. Okay, so this gets me right to where I was trying to go next, is the Star Wars hotel. Because now, instead of putting your Imagineers in a campus, you're going to house a bunch of them in this building. Okay, which is going to be the equivalent of a very fancy bungalow. All right, so that they can further develop whatever it is they're doing over with monsters and all of that. But that wasn't the plan. And I'm not saying that the Star Wars hotel is replacing the Imagineering campus, but it's just sort of like everything that they're doing is so without thought and consideration. Out of all the things you could have done with that Star Wars hotel, making it offices for Imagineering is the best you could come up with. The thought that everything is like, like basically the logic with the Star Wars hotel must have been, we'll try it. We'll put a bunch of stuff behind the paywall. We'll get a bunch of money. Worst case scenario, it's a write-off, and we have office space or storage space. It's a big warehouse. We have nothing to lose. And that's not a long-term business model.
No, because you can only do I think that this depreciation trick that they were pulling for a couple of years, I'm like, I don't think that lasts all the way through, and most people aren't even up on the legal requirements for depreciation of things, because from what I understand, like you're probably not going to see. This is what I was told, is if it's already been gutted, so as part of the depreciation, because you cannot put something on the tax write-off has been depreciated unless it actually is destroyed.
Right.
So yeah, they have gutted the building, so you're not going to see pictures of like Imagineering cubicles and with the atrium of the Halcyon. You're not going to get that with them. But you look at the problem with it is that they built in zero flexibility for it. It's just like there was no possible way for them to actually save it and make it financially viable, because of all of all the steps of the entire production made it impossible to work except for this one way. This one business plan could only work that way. You couldn't have people people say is just like, okay, we'll make a dinner show out of it.
Right.
Well, I mean, if you make it a dinner show, then you obviously would want to use the same kind of transport system that they had, which was the box truck thing that you would want to do that for, but you're not going to be able to transport somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 500 people from one place to the other that quickly for it. You're not going to be able to pay, and also the whole entire thing because everyone kept on thinking dinner theater. I'm like, the main cost of the entire thing was the entertainment. The entertainers are what sunk it. And then the ironic part is just like the entertainers are the only reason why you went there to the first place, is because you have all of these people that were very much in story and very much in character. Well, that was the most expensive part, and that's the reason why it got sunk, was the reason why you wanted to be there in the first place.
But this is what happens when you build a cruise ship in a warehouse. Because like you said, it's a single-use proposition. There's no way, even if you could get the people there, there's no way that was going to function as a dining experience, because it's not built to turn people around in a dining experience.
Yeah, and it's so short-sighted, and the way that they were doing it, and also that also speaks to, if you want to talk about the interactivity and everything, it's just like Jenny Nichols did a 4-hour presentation on this.
Oh, it was 10
hours.
10 hours.
I think it was 4, but
it's way better than I ever expected it to be.
Oh yeah, it was amazing. But I'm like, you took hours and hours and hours to explain how horrible this is. I'm just like this is not just a sorry, Tom. This is not just a failure of a design. Like this could be the most failureness of all failures that have ever existed in the history of the word failure.
If you were doing that as a standalone business, forget the Star Wars of it all, right? Forget the IP. If you were doing that as a standalone business and you were trying to raise money, one of the first things that would be asked is, great, what's your exit strategy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also the other one was just like, okay, what's your market for this? And most people are not aware about this. I don't know if it's been, I don't know if I've covered it on other shows or whatever. But in any case, one of the things that they noticed about it is that it wasn't that their clientele list was so small that they had people that were like ultra wealthy that were going on this trip like 3 and 4 times. Like they didn't even there wasn't even like a growing fan base for this. No, it was a specific, very, very tiny group of people that really, really loved it and had a lot of money. But it was such a tiny amount of people that was doing that. There was no way that you can have any kind of financial viability of it. And one of the reasons why I would come out so strongly against somebody like Tom, who says it's not a failure, is I'm just like you really needed this to be a failure. This being a failure probably saved the Walt Disney Company. Of course, they're going to try to kill it again, but nevertheless, it probably saved the Walt Disney Company with that, because this was the model that Chapek and Iger wanted to implement throughout the entire company. They wanted to have very small boutique operations that would only cater to a very small group of people for an exorbitant amount.
It's the land expansion concept you talked about earlier, but applied to a resort.
Yes, yeah, and if it would have succeeded, you can go through a very nightmare scenario here where they would jack up the price of, it's just like it would make the lawyer in Jurassic Park blush. And just like, oh no, we're going to charge to go inside of the Magic Kingdom. We're going to charge you somewhere in the neighborhood of $20,000 per day. There will only be 200 people in the entire park, and you will have run free throughout the entire experience. We're going to have all of your meals and everything.
They already do it. They do that with the after hours tickets. They're not charging that much, obviously, but when you consider what they're charging everybody all day long for a truncated day, they're doing it.
Yeah. So that's where we were going to go. We were going to go with a $20,000 per day Magic Kingdom for only 200 people, which, by the way, is not even financially viable. I mean, like even if you had it like it was sold out every single time, it still wouldn't work, because the theme park art form, while it's extraordinarily sophisticated, it only functions as essentially middle class entertainment.
Right.
You can't get an experience like Pirates of the Caribbean for 200 people per hour. The level of detail, the level of complexity that you're dealing with just the audio animatronics alone and everything, you would never get enough R&D funds to be able to come up with something that complex and not be able to serve tens of thousands of people per day. That's the only way that this works. It's like the whole entire thing where, like you're looking at the economy, and I won't get too far into it, but when you're looking at something like, like our declining birth rate, I don't think people really understand how horrific that situation is, because, like we're talking right now on equipment, like I'm talking right now on a microphone that, like it cost me $25. I think it sounds great and everything, but like that only exists because there's 8 million people on the planet, because you need to get that to get this level
to bring the cost down.
To bring the cost down to get this level of
people don't think that way. No. Listen, at least you're burying this part of the conversation at the end of the show, because it's way too intellectual of a thought. No offense. I know you're not offended because I'm not insulting you, but like it's because now people don't even put a monetary amount on their own time.
Correct. Yeah.
And now you're talking about amortization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, but it is something that I think that's my futurist side.
No. I mean, you're spot on. I'm just teasing you, because it's kind of like, oh, okay, so you're expecting me, not me, but you're expecting them to sit there and go, oh, all right, well, who's going to absorb the cost for this endeavor? Like, the consumer doesn't care about that. I'm with you unequivocally, and I think that the way that they could have managed the Star Wars hotel in a way that, because I do agree it's a failure, but I think the way that they could have managed that would have been smarter for business and maybe more enticing for the consumer, was to market it as a pop-up. We're going to do this thing for 8 months, and that's it. It's an 8-month run. And then if it's really, really good and you have the rest of the year full, you can go, guess what? Due to overwhelming success, we're going to extend it for the rest of the year. And then it's a guarantee. Then you can't even call it a failure, because you literally managed your expectations up front.
Yeah. Yeah, and really, like you could definitely see a possibility of, like, the way to have saved a portion of this experience. I do think that certain portions were just completely ridiculous on its face, like the interactivity stuff. But really, like, if you would have placed this completely adjacent to the park, well, you solved like at least 65% of your problems right there. If it was attached to the park, then you would be a lot better off on that one. I mean, heck, like instead of, like you arriving, which was that ridiculous arrival experience, like I remember when I was working in the resorts, that was an enormous concern all the time, was something called the arrival experience, which is, like you're driving in your car and you get up to the porte cochere and you want to have everything look nice and pretty, and, like well manicured lawns and blah, 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 blah. And, like you have a really nice cast member that's right there that's welcoming you and everything. Well, like you drive up to the Star Wars hotel and you look at the backside complete ugliness of Galaxy's Edge, which is a lot uglier on the East Coast than it is on the West Coast, because the West Coast, they at least have to camouflage it on that side. There's no camouflage.
Well, also there's no real vantage point to even see most of it. You're exactly, pretty much up on a freeway.
Yeah. So like
it is horrible.
They would have had it so that you could, like if it was attached to the park, and then it's just like, no, you were just going to go through you would go through a special gate, like at the studios, and that would be your check-in to the hotel, would just be to go up to the studios.
But that's what I thought it was going to be. I thought it would have been sort of like they did with Fantasy Springs. I would have thought that the hotel would have been right there. You would have had an entrance, and then that would have been problem solved.
Yeah. And then, like, don't make them like super, super tiny rooms. And, like I look at something like, like one of my, I use this as an example just from an aesthetic point of view. Again, the operation was also, there was problems everywhere, but still, if you just want to attack it like on on an individual basis, you look at something like, the ship that was in the movie Passengers, the one with Chris Pratt in it.
Okay.
Yeah, so that ship is absolutely the Avalon. That's what it was called. I mean, gorgeous production design. Like, I would love to be, if you wanted to produce a quote unquote bunker that looked like that hotel, I would be absolutely one of the people that would be saving up money in order to get go there, because it was luxurious, it was spacious, it has wonderful design elements. I'm like, yeah, I don't care if that was in a bunker. I would be more than happy to do it. But these little tiny cruise ship cabin things, which again was just penny pinching, it's just like yeah, no,
Well,
I'm not
it goes
gonna do
back to your
that.
cost thing. They go, listen, we want to create this experience, and in order to get this many people in at this much a night, we got to make these rooms yay big.
Yeah. So, and that
Wrong.
was because they were chasing a price point to begin with. When your objective is to make money, you often will not make money. When your objective is to produce a great product or a great service, then the money will follow from that. But if you put the money beforehand, then you will cut corners at every single opportunity, in which case you'll remove all the uniqueness and the reason why people would buy it in the first place.
And you know what? It's the perfect place to end this conversation. I really enjoy talking to you. The river is it, right? Because that's really the cherry on top to what you just said. When you pull that piece out, that is the last straw. That is the ceiling. Yeah. And I wasn't 100% certain of it until we had this conversation today. So thank you for that. I hope we can somehow affect that change. Fingers crossed, and I'm sure we'll talk before that actually happens. But your insight is just it's top notch, and I could talk to you for another 2 hours, but I won't do that to you.
Yeah, I mean, like, and the thing that I keep on harping about, if you go on, if your listeners go on to Twitter and look at Twitter/X, and like my handle is at JLHOmni. The letter writing campaign, that's the only way that this works. That is taken very seriously. I have had multiple examples of that, and it's just like, look, you can do your little change.org, and you could do your little petitions and everything online, and Disney doesn't have to pay attention to that at all. They do have to pay attention to every single letter that comes to them, and they do genuinely and seriously take it very, very seriously. And I know that they have a matrix. They have a little tick mark thing, a digital tick mark thing. It's just like, yep, we got another letter. No one wants us to remove the Rivers of America. And unlike in certain situations, this is going to be entirely at the feet of Jeff Volley, which is the president of Walt Disney World, and he will not be necessarily swayed by political movements or anybody that goes on in Burbank, because these are local decisions. Unfortunately, most of the time. Now, this is the only time in my life where I think that we've ever had a time period where that works to the advantage. But yeah, the local leadership are the ones that normally determine the destiny of the parks. And it's going to be up to him. So when anybody talks to me about it, just like, oh, but Bob Iger always does horrible things, I'm just like, well, it really isn't his call most of the time. It's going to be the call of the people that are actually running running the resort locally.
His call's cars. That's the extent of his call.
Yeah, well, you could put cars inside of the Speedway for a couple years and then take them out.
No, but I'm saying, like, the operational decision is, it's like you said, it's all local. But the idea of, oh, well, if you're going to gut that thing, cram this old IP in it.
Mm-hmm.
Which, what's kind of funny is I just called Cars old IP, but I would never call Snow White old IP.
Right. But well, one of the reasons why that is, and I didn't really crystallize this until I was watching a video by an amazing and accomplished historian, C.W. Gross, which in YouTube he's goes under the name of Monster Kid Corey. Very insightful stuff that he produces and everything. The problem with Pixar and the reason why Pixar is largely incompatible with the parks in general is because Pixar is entirely of today. And by today, I mean it's always about the current time in which it was presented. So Cars, which I believe was released in 2006, maybe
Something around there.
somewhere. It's always going to be 2006 for that.
Yeah.
Well, but when you have something like Snow White is
timeless.
Snow White is a timeless thing, and it's not just the fact that we say that it is or that we like that it is, and just like no, you're talking about a timeless story that has existed for hundreds and hundreds of years, largely because of the way in which it speaks to the human condition.
So I guess is it the story or is it the production? Maybe it's a bit of both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's definitely both with it, but it also, it speaks to higher truths. I mean, like, look, okay, Snow White came out in 37, and then you have Cars, which came out with, I think it is 2006. What's the theme of Cars?
Cars.
And I mean, like, what's the lesson that you should get from the Cars movie? Do you remember that?
Yeah, cars go vroom. No, the lesson was friends. It was having a good friends because Larry the Cable Guy was his friend.
Okay.
Or Mater or whatever.
Yeah. But it takes a little while to figure that out, and I'm just like, I'm not sure if friendship is a theme that you want to be able to build a whole land around that would hopefully survive for
Listen, hear me
30
out.
to 40 years.
We need a Cars live action movie.
Yeah, that would definitely, that would sink it. So I would be for that. I'm like, if you want to have that train wreck and then have it be associated with that, then maybe we could get this out of our systems.
But it could be like they could transform too. Do you know what I mean? So we could do like a Transformers Cars cross. Come on, if we're gonna ruin it, let's ruin it right.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, definitely, yeah. It's just to make sure, and like make sure to make it like super complicated and like no story whatsoever, no pathos, no nothing. Just like cars transforming into other things.
Well, lots of exposition.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, then you can like market it as like, oh no, it was from this thing that happened in the 80s that no one cares about anymore, but we're gonna mess it up anyway.
It frightens me when. This is just basically like Twitter snark now, but it frightens me because, people will write stuff like this and I'm like, stop giving them ideas.
Yeah, it's true. And I do that myself. I don't do that myself, but I tell people don't do that. I'm like, please do not make any suggestions, because the thing that most people don't really realize is that, first of all, if a company is going to pay attention to social media at all, they pay attention to it on a very surface level. They don't have any context whatsoever that it's associated with that. So if you you really can't determine the difference between snark and sarcasm versus sincerity. And that's one of the reasons why I always put a satire warning on all of my tweets and everything. I'm like, if I'm going to be doing a satire, I'm like, I'm just letting you know, I'm totally joking about this. I am not serious about it at all. Let's move into the conversation there, because one of the things that they look at, like if Disney sees on there that, like, for example, like I always bring up like Rivers of America, just like I almost never want to mention the word Cars, because they're going to do a term search and they're going to see it's just like, oh, look, there's a lot, look, Cars is trending. That's good. Okay, so we've made a good decision. Just like, no, why is it trending? Because they won't notice. Just like, oh yeah, everyone hates cars now. That's the superficiality of their mentality when they're looking at these things when they do market research.
But if you think about it from a cost saving perspective, all you would have to do was render out the original Cars movie at a higher resolution. Boom, live action remake.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's basically it. Yeah, that could work. Yeah.
Joshua, I appreciate you. We'll do this again.
Yes, this was great. Look forward to the next time as well.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
It's a new year, which means it's time to spice up your kitchen with Pampered Chef. Pampered Chef has all the goodies, from spatulas, mandolins, and amazing pots and pans, not to mention knives. So go check out Colleen Herman at pamperedchef.com/PWS/Colleen Herman, and don't miss out on the small appliances like the deluxe air fryer and coffee maker. So spice up your kitchen today. pamperedchef.com/PWS/Colleen Herman. And with no estate plan, you could be leaving those you love the most with high taxes, probate fees, and an incomplete or divided estate and legal fights and fees. If you live in Florida, contact RK Law for a free consultation to discuss the options and tools you have available to protect your home, savings, and estate for those you love the most. To get started, send an email to russell@rklawpro.com. That's russell@rklawpro.com, or call 786-566-2456 to set up your consultation today. Last minute shipping from the parks, my friends at the UPS store have you covered. And even if you're local, they have lots of services from P.O. boxes to notaries. So go check out my friends at the UPS store, 6526 Old Brick Road, located right behind the Magic Kingdom. And as always, William Bailey Travel is available to help you plan your next vacation. So whether you're going to Disney, a cruise, a Disney cruise, or just looking to explore the world, William provides a customizable experience at competitive rates. You can reach out to William at william.bailey@academytravel.com, william.bailey@academytravel.com.